Hi, I'm Paul Nation. I've written a lot of books and articles about English language teaching, and you can find most of the articles on my website under Publications. They are free for you to download. Today I want to talk about designing a balanced listening and speaking course, focusing particularly on group work and conversation activities. We're looking at listening and speaking together because it's really hard to separate them in a course. One person speaking is another person's listening. To make sure that you have a well-balanced listening and speaking program, it's useful to look across the 4 strands and see that you have a good coverage of each of the strands. Let's look at each strand in turn. The meaning-focused input strand should have a strong listening component, and about half of this strand should involve listening. The kinds of activities that you include in the meaning-focused input strand cover extensive listening and conversation activities, where pairs or small groups are working together on a listening and speaking task. About 50% of the meaning-focused output strand should focus on speaking. And there can be a range of speaking activities in this strand. They include problem-solving speaking, which we're going to look at today, prepared talks, and pair conversation. The language-focused learning strand is also an important part of a listening and speaking program. This includes activities like dictation, where the learners listen to a text and have to write down what they hear. The language-focused learning strand of a course can include strategy training for listening and speaking. It also includes activities like listening with questions and memorizing useful phrases and short dialogues. It can also include pronunciation practice. The fluency development strand of a listening and speaking course includes activities for improving listening fluency, such as quick listens or listening to stories. It can also include speaking activities for developing fluency, like 4-3-2 and repeated speaking. Let's now look at some problem-solving tasks. Here is a list of several tasks which use different kinds of outcomes. Suggest the dangers within the house for a child. Choose items from a menu to suit the tastes of the guests. Rank the improvements that could be made to a house. Decide whether it would be better for both parents to get a job. Decide whether to raise a child as a vegetarian. Locate an addition to the house. Arrange the plan of a house. Arrange the furniture in a room. You can see that there are lots of different kinds of tasks that people can work on for group speaking activities. The tasks simply set up a problem for the learners to solve, and they have to reach some kind of solution. These solutions include coming up with a list of suggestions of things that could be done, choosing from a list of suggestions, perhaps choosing only one item, ranking a list of suggestions, deciding what should be done, locating some kind of change, and arranging items to suit a particular plan. Let's look in more detail at a ranking activity. Here's a ranking activity involving a teenager leaving home. When teenagers leave home, they face many problems. Look at the following list of problems and add 2 others. Then rank the problems in order, from the easiest problem to overcome to the most difficult to overcome. Then we have a list of 5 items to rank. Preparing suitable food, avoiding involvement with bad friends, finding time to study, managing household jobs like cleaning, etc., managing money wisely. When learners work on a ranking activity, they can either rank all of the items, or they can be asked to choose the top 3 items and the bottom item, which they would definitely put at the bottom of the list. Having a command like this, where they don't have to rank every item, can make the activity a bit shorter. So if you don't have enough time, you can use some command like that to make the activity happen more quickly. Let's look at another kind of problem-solving activity, the one involving dangers in the house for a child. When you get learners to do a problem-solving activity, you need to provide some background to the problem. Every year, children die or are injured within their own homes. You have just moved into a new house and you have a child aged 11 months who is just beginning to walk. Your child is very active and you are the only person around during the day to care for your child. After the background, we then have the task that the learners have to do. Make a list of 10 possible dangers in your house, making sure that you include the most likely dangers. Be ready to report back on the dangers on your list and why you included them. Notice that these instructions give the learners a particular number of items that they have to reach in their list, and then they also are told to prepare for having to report back on their answers. These activities are very easy to make, and they keep the learners well occupied. But a very important part of the activity is the handout sheet for the activity. The handout sheet includes background information and includes the task that the learners have to do. When a teacher designs the background sheet, it's useful to include a few words which might be just outside the learner's knowledge, so that they can learn some new vocabulary while they do the activity. If the background information includes some restrictions or conditions, then this can make the activity a little bit more difficult to solve and thus result in much more speaking during the activity. So now we've looked briefly at problem-solving activities. Let's now look at another kind of speaking activities. This is called split information. In split information activities, the learners work in pairs or groups, and each person in the pair or the group has a different piece of information that everybody else needs. They must share their pieces of information in order to complete the task. A very easy activity to make of this kind is called the strip story. It's called the strip story because it involves thin strips of paper with a sentence on each piece of paper. To make a strip story, you need a text consisting of several sentences. Ideally, there should be one sentence for each person in the group. So if you're working with groups of 10, then you need a story with 10 sentences. If there are too many sentences, some people can have 2 sentences. Here's an example of the strip story. This example is taken from the book Fast Track. Notice that the sentences are written on separate lines. This is so that when you cut up the sentences, the pattern of the cutting doesn't show what the order of the sentences will be. Each learner gets one sentence and can't show it to the other people. They have to memorize their sentence and then give the strip of paper back to the teacher. After they've memorized their sentences, they then have to tell their sentence to each other. and then they have to decide what's the correct order of the sentences. That is, how do they go together to make up the story? So when they get their sentence, they don't know whether it's the first sentence, the last sentence, the second or third or fourth sentence in the story. But they have to decide that by talking with each other. When they've reached the decision of the correct order of the sentences, then they've finished the activity. At that point, the teacher can put the whole story on an overhead projector or on the board so they can see if they were correct or not. There are two kinds of speaking that go on during this activity. One kind of speaking is simply repeating the sentence that they memorized. The other kind of speaking is the language needed to organize the sentences. This includes things like, I think mine comes first. I think mine comes after yours. How does that connect with the previous sentence? And phrases and sentences like that, which are needed in order to put the sentences in order. This activity works well with both low proficiency and high proficiency learners. Low proficiency learners get value from having to memorize the sentence, and then with a limited number of phrases they can work together to get them in the right order. With high proficiency learners, you can choose a more challenging text where the order is difficult to work out. That's one kind of split information activity. Now let's look at another kind. This split information activity involves two sets of pictures. Some of the pictures are the same, some of the pictures are different. The learners have to describe the pictures to each other and decide if their two pictures are the same or if they're different. So the learners work in pairs. One learner has sheet A, the other learner has sheet B, and then they work through the pictures one by one. You can make this activity more interesting by telling the learners to work through 10 pictures and then change partners so that they can work on the next 10 pictures with a different partner. In the activity that you can see, there are 50 pictures. So this means that there could be 5 changes of partner. This activity is based around the high-frequency words of English and gives the learners opportunity to make use of those words. Notice that some of the pictures have some labels to help the learners use vocabulary during the activity. A split information activity like this works really well and gets the learners very busy talking. The last thing that I want to look at in this video is something called procedures. Procedures are activities which are divided into steps, and procedures can be applied to various kinds of activities, such as problem-solving activities or split information activities. One of the most useful procedures is the pyramid procedure. The pyramid procedure involves learners looking at a problem individually and coming up with some kind of solution to it. For example, in a ranking activity, each learner will look at the items to rank and make a rough ranking according to their own individual opinion. The second step of a pyramid procedure is to work at the level of pairs. So the learners get into pairs and they compare their rankings with each other's ranking. Then they reach the decision between the two of them what their ideal ranking would be. The next step is then to work at the group level. So 2 pairs join to make a group of 4. The group of 4 now must reach a consensus about the ranking. The final step is at the class level. All of the groups then come together and try to reach a final agreement about a ranking that all of the class can live with. If the class is quite large, you can just have a representative from each group bringing along their ranking and then working with the representatives of the other group. Those who are not the representative sit around watching the others do the ranking. The pyramid procedure is a very useful activity, and it can be used over a wide variety of tasks. A second kind of procedure is the expert group family group procedure. And this kind of procedure works well with split information tasks. Let's take the example of the strip story that we've just looked at. Let's imagine that your strip story activity has 10 sentences. All of the learners who have the same sentence get together and practice saying their sentence and thinking about where it might come in a story. Once they've worked on their own sentences together in their expert groups, they then divide up into family groups so that each family group has a learner who has a different sentence from the story. The expert group part of the procedure makes sure that the learners understand the meaning of their sentence and can say it correctly. In the expert group step, they can also practice memorizing their sentence. The expert group family group procedure also works well with the split information task involving the pictures, same or different. All the learners who have sheet A get together and practice describing their pictures. They learn the names for the items in the pictures. They learn the names for parts of the items. They practice how to say whether something has a dark line around it or not, whatever's relevant. And after some time of this expert group practice, they then form pairs with one learner from sheet A and one learner with sheet B. So the expert group part of the procedure raises the quality of the activity for the second part of the procedure when the learners are in family groups. The third major kind of procedure is having a series of outcomes to a task, particularly a problem-solving task. You remember the task we just looked at of the dangers within the home. The first step of that procedure would be suggesting a list of dangers. The second step of the procedure could then involve ranking those dangers. Problem-solving activities can also involve reporting back. So when learners finish the activity, they can then report back their solution to the rest of the class. The other members of the class can then question their solution and ask them to justify why they reached that particular solution. Reporting back involves a different kind of speaking. Discussing something is different from reporting back about it. And so reporting back provides an opportunity for varied repetition of the same language that occurred in the activity. It's good to add something like reporting back to an activity because of this. We get repetition and we get varied retrieval occurring as a result. We've now looked at a range of activities that could be used for pair or group conversation. We've looked at activities which involve problem solving. We've looked at activities which involve split information. These activities provide the opportunity for plenty of speaking to occur and for learners to have a chance to gain repetition and varied retrieval of language items that they need to learn. A well-balanced listening and speaking course includes plenty of activities which involve this kind of speaking.